I'm Mila, a 36-year-old woman living what I thought was a fairly ordinary life. I married my college sweetheart, Jack, a man who was once my rock. We didn't have kids, just the two of us and our dreams, living in a house that was finally ours, mortgage-free. This house was a symbol of our years together, bought on a mortgage that we aggressively paid down, especially after I used the inheritance from my dad to make the final payments. Our life was simple but content, or so I believed. Jack, tall and usually unflappable with his finance job, was my partner in everything. We had our share of arguments, like any couple, but I always felt we were a team. His parents, George and Martha, had become like my own. George, a burly, kind-hearted man with a booming laugh, and Martha, a gentle soul who had taken me under her wing from day one. Our relationship was one of mutual respect and affection. Tonight was supposed to be a small celebration, just George and us, marking the end of our mortgage payments. The house was warmly lit, and I had spent the day cooking George's favorite dishes. I remember glancing at the clock, noting Jack's unusual lateness. George arrived first, cheerful as always, but with an undercurrent of concern for his son's tardiness. We chatted in the kitchen, George regaling me with stories of his youth, his laughter filling the room. But as the night grew older, my anxiety crept in. Finally, the doorbell rang, and I rushed to open it, expecting Jack, maybe with a story of traffic or a last-minute work emergency. What I saw instead felt like a scene from a movie. Jack stood there, not alone, but with a young, stylish woman clinging to his arm. She had an air of confidence, almost defiance, as she scanned our home, her eyes lingering on the pictures of our life together on the walls. "Jack, what's going on?" I managed to get out, my voice a mix of confusion and rising anger. Jack looked different. His usual calm demeanor was replaced with a cold, almost cruel smirk. "This is Lana," he said nonchalantly, his grip on her waist possessive. "She's going to be my wife." The words hit me like a freight train. Wife? Jack, are you joking? What about us? Our life together? George, who had come to see what the commotion was about, looked as shocked as I felt. "Jack, son, what are you saying? Mila is your wife." Lana finally spoke, her voice sharp and businesslike. "Looks like a nice place. We'll probably change a few things once it's ours." Jack's next words felt surreal. "Mila, I want a divorce. It's time you left." I was stunned, my mind racing. "Divorce? Jack, we built this life together, and you want to throw it away for her?" George's face was red with anger and disbelief. "Jack, think about what you're doing. This is madness." Jack shrugged, dismissive. "My mind's made up. Start packing, Mila. This house isn't yours anymore." I stood there, rooted to the spot, as George took my arm. "Mila, let's go. You don't need to take this." We left the house, my home, a place filled with memories now tainted by betrayal. I spent the night at George and Martha's, their kindness a small comfort in the storm of my suddenly shattered life. I woke up in George and Martha's guest room, feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. The events of last night replayed in my mind, each detail a fresh jab of pain. I could hear George and Martha in the kitchen, their voices a low murmur. Dragging myself out of bed, I stumbled into the kitchen, where George was making coffee and Martha was setting the table. They both looked up as I entered, their faces a mix of concern and anger. "Morning, Mila," George said gruffly, handing me a cup of coffee. "Slept any?" "Not really," I replied, my voice hoarse. "Feels like a nightmare." Martha came over and gave me a hug. "That boy has lost his mind, Mila. You don't deserve this." I sipped the coffee, feeling its warmth but not much else. "I don't know what to do, Martha. My whole life just turned upside down." George slammed his cup on the table, his usual jovial demeanor gone. "We'll not let him get away with this, Mila. He can't just throw you out like yesterday's garbage." Martha nodded, her eyes fierce. You've put too much into that house, into that marriage. It's not right. I felt a surge of anger, thinking about Jack and Lana in my house. I paid for most of that house. My inheritance, my savings. George's eyes lit up. That's it. You have rights, Mila. That house is as much yours as it is his. Martha was quick to agree. Yes, you need to fight for what's yours. Don't let that woman take everything from you. I started to feel a fire building inside me, fueled by their support. You're right. I won't let Jack and his mistress walk all over me. George stood up, determination on his face. We'll get a lawyer, someone who can sort this mess out. You won't be alone in this, Mila. Martha squeezed my hand. We're with you, every step of the way. That boy needs a lesson on how to treat people. Sitting there with them, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, I could get through this. But I knew it was going to be a long, hard fight. The morning at George and Martha's had stirred something in me, a sense of resolve I hadn't felt in a long time. I spent the day buried in financial records, piecing together every contribution I'd made towards our home. The dining table was littered with bank statements, mortgage documents, and old receipts, tangible proof of my investment in what was supposed to be our shared dream. George, sitting across from me, was meticulously going through each document. Look at this, Mila. You've paid more than half of the mortgage, and that's not even counting your inheritance. You have a strong claim to the house. I nodded, my fingers tracing the figures that represented years of my life. I'm going to call Jack. He needs to understand he can't just erase me from his life and take everything we built together. Martha, who had been brewing some coffee, set a cup in front of me. Be clear and stand your ground, Mila. He's used to walking all over you, but not this time. I dialed Jack's number. It rang twice before he picked up. Mila? What do you want? His voice was dismissive, cold. I took a deep breath, steadying my nerves. Jack, I've been looking over our finances. It turns out I've put more money into the house. My inheritance, my savings, it adds up to me owning 2/3 of the house. There was a brief silence on the line. You're joking, right? No, Jack. I'm dead serious. I've calculated it all. If you want to keep the house, you need to buy out my share. That's $266,000. I could almost hear his sneer through the phone. You think you can just demand money out of the blue? This isn't a demand, Jack. It's what I'm owed. It's fair. You can either pay me, or we sell the house and split the money. Your choice. Jack's voice was laced with annoyance. Fine, you'll get your money. But after this, we're done. I hung up, my heart racing. He agreed to pay, I said, half in shock. George was beaming with pride. You did good, Mila. Standing up to him like that. Martha came over and hugged me. I'm proud of you, Mila. You're taking control of your life again. That afternoon, as I sorted through more paperwork, George and Martha shared stories of their own struggles and triumphs, reminding me that resilience was a family trait. We discussed lawyers, next steps, and strategies, turning their kitchen into a war room of sorts. As evening fell, George cooked dinner, a simple stew that filled the house with a comforting aroma. We ate together, talking about everything but the situation at hand, giving me a much-needed break from the stress. The battle was far from over, but for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt like I wasn't facing it alone. With George and Martha's support, I had a fighting chance. And as I drifted off to sleep, I clung to that thought like a lifeline. The morning of the divorce proceedings, I walked into the lawyer's office with a steely resolve. The office was cold and sterile, the kind of place where futures were dismantled and rearranged. Jack entered, his face an emotionless mask. He wasn't alone, Lana, his mistress, was glued to his side. Her confidence seemed forced, a thin veneer over her uncertainty. I could feel their surprise as they saw me sitting there, calm and composed. Before Jack could even find his words, I cut to the chase. "I'm pregnant, Jack." Jack's eyes widened, his composure slipping. "What? Pregnant?" Lana's face twisted from confidence to confusion and then to rage. "You said you hadn't touched her in months. You lying jerk." I ignored her outburst and continued, "I'm asking for alimony, Jack. $800 a month, for the next 21 years. For our child." The lawyer, Mr. Harris, a middle-aged man with a stern face, nodded in approval. "Given the circumstances, Mrs. Smith's request is perfectly reasonable." Jack looked like he had been punched. "This is insane. You can't just spring this on me and expect me to pay up." I met his gaze squarely. "I can and I am. You made your bed, now lie in it. You owe this to our child, if not to me." Lana was fuming, her voice shrill with anger. "Jack, you can't do this. She's clearly trying to trap you." Jack, flustered and overwhelmed, ran a hand through his hair. I need time to think." Mr. Harris interjected, "Mr. Smith, the law is clear. You have a financial responsibility to your child." Jack slumped into the chair, defeated. "Fine," he muttered. "I'll pay the alimony." As they left, Lana was hissing into Jack's ear, her facade of poise completely shattered. I remained seated, feeling a mixture of triumph and sadness. This wasn't just about the money, it was about standing up for myself and my future child. In the following weeks, I worked with Mr. Harris to iron out the details. He was impressed with my resolve, often remarking on my newfound toughness. "You're not the same woman who walked into my office a month ago," he said during one of our meetings. I smiled, feeling a sense of empowerment. "I guess I'm not. I have someone else to think about now." As I left his office after signing the final papers, I felt a sense of closure. The battle was tough, but I had come out stronger. I was ready to face whatever came next, not just for me, but for my child as well. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a say in it. After the tumultuous divorce proceedings, I found an unexpected source of strength in Jack's parents, George and Martha. We sat in their cozy living room, a stark contrast to the cold lawyer's office, plotting our next move. George, always a man of action, was pacing the room. "We need to show that scoundrel he can't just trample over our family," he said, his voice tinged with anger. Martha, ever the strategist, added, "We've got to be smart about this. We can't just barge in there and make a scene." I nodded, feeling a mix of gratitude and determination. "I agree. But what can we do? He's made his bed with Lana." George stopped pacing and turned to me. "What if we visit them? Regularly. Make our presence felt. Remind Jack of the family he's turning his back on." Martha's eyes lit up. "Yes, and it'll drive that little homewrecker up the wall. She won't like us being around, reminding her of what she's done." I couldn't help but smile at their cunning plan. "You think it'll work? Make her uncomfortable?" George grinned. "Oh, I'm sure it will. We'll be the most annoying, ever-present in-laws. She won't know what hit her." Martha clapped her hands together. "We'll start tomorrow. A nice, long, unannounced visit." The next day, we executed our plan. George rang the doorbell of what used to be my home, a big smile plastered on his face as Jack opened the door. "Son. We thought we'd drop by. Spend some quality time together," George boomed, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Lana appeared behind Jack, her smile forced. "Oh, what a surprise. And what is she doing here?" Martha breezed past her, adding, "She's with us. We just couldn't stay away. It's been too long." We spent hours there, talking loudly, laughing, and reminiscing about old times, pointedly ignoring Lana's growing discomfort. Every time she tried to interject or change the subject, George or Martha skillfully steered the conversation back. As we left, Lana's frustration was evident. She was fuming, barely managing a fake smile. In the car, Martha chuckled. "Did you see her face? She was about to explode." George was laughing too. "We're just getting started. That girl has no idea what she's in for." I sat in the back seat, a sense of satisfaction washing over me. It was a small, petty victory, but after everything that had happened, it felt good to take some control back, to push back against the injustice of it all. With George and Martha by my side, I felt stronger, ready to face whatever came next. A few weeks after our in-law intervention strategy began, I received unexpected news from Martha during one of our coffee chats. "Mila, you won't believe it. Jack's put the house up for sale," she said, her voice a mix of shock and satisfaction. I almost choked on my coffee. "What? Why would he do that?" Martha shrugged. "Seems like Lana can't stand us being around. She's pushing him to move." I pondered the situation, an idea slowly forming in my mind. "Martha, what if I bought the house back?" George, who had been quietly reading the newspaper, looked up. "Buy it back? You think that's a good idea?" I nodded. "Yes, but at a lower price. Jack's desperate, and I have the money from the settlement. It's perfect." Martha smiled slyly. That would be quite the turn of events. Imagine Lana's face if she knew. I contacted a realtor friend, explaining the situation and my plan. She agreed to help, ensuring my identity remained hidden during the negotiations. A week later, I sat with my realtor friend, discussing our strategy. Jack's asking for a high price, but we know he's desperate. "Let's lowball him." My realtor nodded. "I'll start the negotiations. He won't know it's you until the deal is sealed." The negotiations went back and forth for days. Finally, Jack caved, accepting a much lower offer than his initial asking price. My realtor friend called me with the news. "We got it, Mila." "He accepted the offer," she said, barely containing her excitement. I couldn't help but laugh. "I can't believe it. I'm buying my house back." The day we closed the deal, I met my realtor at the office. "You're now the proud owner of your old house," she said, handing me the keys. The day I reclaimed my house was a day of triumph. I stood outside the familiar front door, the weight of the keys in my hands symbolizing so much more than mere ownership. My heart pounded with a mix of excitement and apprehension as I prepared to face Jack and Lana one last time in what was once our shared home. Unlocking the door, I stepped inside. The sight of Jack and Lana, surrounded by boxes in the midst of packing, brought a sense of surreal finality. They both looked up, shock and disbelief etched on their faces. "What the hell, Mila? How did you get in here?" Jack's voice was a mixture of anger and confusion. I couldn't help but smirk. "Oh, didn't you hear? I'm the new owner." "Surprise!" Lana's face turned a shade of red, her eyes wide in shock. "You? This has to be some kind of sick joke." Crossing my arms, I leaned against the door frame. "No joke, Lana. I bought the house. It's mine now, and you two are trespassing." Jack's face contorted with anger. "This is low, even for you, Mila. You think you can just waltz back in here and take over?" I straightened up, my voice firm and unwavering. "Yes, Jack, that's exactly what I'm doing. You wanted me out, and now I'm back. My house, my rules. Time for you to leave." Lana, fuming, spat out, "You can't do this. We have rights." I walked into the living room, standing my ground. "The only right you have right now is to walk out of my house. I suggest you do it quickly." Jack, realizing the futility of arguing, began to gather his belongings. Lana followed suit, her movements jerky with frustration. As they left, Lana hissed at me, "You haven't won anything, Mila." Watching them leave, I felt a surge of empowerment. This house, which had witnessed the rise and fall of my marriage, was now a symbol of my resilience. It was a battleground where I had emerged victorious. After the door closed behind them, I walked through the empty rooms. Each space echoed with memories, both good and bad, but now it was time to make new ones. I envisioned the house filled with laughter and love once more, a sanctuary for me and my future child. Sitting down in the quiet living room, I allowed myself a moment to take it all in. I had come full circle, but this time, I was in control, a victor reclaiming her kingdom. The journey had been fraught with pain and betrayal, but it had led me to this moment of triumph. My house, my rules, my life. I was ready to start anew, stronger and more determined than ever. One afternoon, as I was arranging the nursery for my soon-to-arrive baby, there was a knock on the door. I opened it to find George and Martha, beaming with smiles. "Mila, dear, how are you holding up?" Martha asked as she stepped inside, her eyes taking in the changes I'd made. "I'm doing well, Martha." "Getting ready for the baby," I replied, leading them into the living room. George, carrying a bag of baby clothes, chuckled. "This little one is going to be spoiled rotten by us, you know that, right?" I laughed, the sound bright and genuine. I wouldn't have it any other way. As we sat, chatting and laughing, another knock came at the door. This time, it was Jack. He looked different, worn out, a little defeated. "Can we talk, Mila?" Jack's voice was low, lacking its usual confidence. I hesitated but nodded, stepping outside to talk to him privately. I messed up, Mila," Jack started, not meeting my eyes. "Lana left me. I'm broke, and I was hoping." I cut him off, my voice steady. "Hoping for what, Jack? For me to take you back? After everything?" Jack's face crumpled. "I know I don't deserve it, but I have nowhere else to go." I looked at him, the man I once loved, now just a stranger filled with regrets. "Jack, I've moved on. I'm starting a new life, for me and my baby. You need to do the same." He nodded slowly, the reality of the situation sinking in. "I understand. I'm sorry, Mila." As he walked away, I felt a closure I didn't know I needed. Turning back to the house, I saw George and Martha watching through the window, their expressions a mix of concern and support. "He won't bother you again, will he?" George asked as I walked back in. I shook my head. "No, he won't. I made it clear." Martha hugged me. "You're so strong, Mila. We're so proud of you." Sitting back down, surrounded by the people who had become my true family, I felt a sense of peace. The journey had been long and fraught with pain, but it had led me here, to a place of strength and new beginnings. The future was uncertain, but it was mine to shape, and I looked forward to every moment of it.
I stood in the doorway of our new home, the home that Richard and I had dreamt of for years. My heart swelled with pride at the thought of the life we were about to start here. The house was still echoing with the sounds of emptiness, waiting to be filled with our laughter and memories. But that dream was about to be shattered in a way I never could have imagined. As I unpacked a box in the kitchen, I heard the doorbell ring. "I'll get it," I called out, wiping my hands on my apron. I opened the door expecting to see a neighbor or maybe a delivery person. Instead, there stood a young woman, probably in her mid-20s, with a confident air about her. "Hello, can I help you?" I asked, puzzled. Before she could answer, Richard appeared behind me. "Ah, you're here. Come in, Isabella," he said cheerfully, brushing past me to welcome her inside. Confused, I followed them into the living room. "Richard, who is this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Emma, meet Isabella. She's my girlfriend," he said, as casually as if he were talking about the weather. I felt the ground beneath me shift. "You're what?" I managed to choke out, my voice trembling. Isabella looked around the house, commenting on everything with an ease that made my stomach churn. It's a lovely house. The kitchen is so spacious, and oh, look at those big windows. Richard beamed at her. I'm glad you like it. Emma, isn't it great that Isabella approves of our new home? I stood there, frozen, as the weight of his words sank in. This was not a misunderstanding or a bad joke. My husband, the man I had trusted and loved for a decade, was openly admitting to an affair in our own home. But the house, it was for us, I stammered, my mind racing. Richard shrugged. Things change, Emma. I've found someone who truly understands me. Isabella laughed, a light, carefree sound that felt like a slap in my face. Oh, don't be so dramatic, Emma. It's just life, you know. Their words cut through me, but they also ignited a fire within me. I wasn't going to be the victim in this cruel play of fate. You think you can just replace me? In my own house? I said, my voice gaining strength. Richard looked at me, his expression cold. It's not just your house anymore, Emma. It's ours. I knew then that this was not the end of my story. It was the beginning of a battle for my dignity, my home, and my future. A battle I was determined to win. Leaving Richard and Isabella in the living room, I retreated to the sanctuary of my bedroom, the walls of which seemed to mock me with their newly painted cheerfulness. As I sat on the edge of our bed, now just a piece of furniture in a house that no longer felt like mine, the reality of Richard's betrayal sank in. Tears streamed down my face, not just for a lost marriage, but for the life I thought I had. The next few hours were a blur. I packed a suitcase with mechanical movements, my mind numbed by shock. Each item I placed inside felt like a piece of my heart being torn away. I couldn't bear to stay in the house a moment longer. Arriving at my parents' house was like stepping into a different world. The familiar warmth and comfort contrasted sharply with the cold betrayal I had just left behind. My mother opened the door, her face lighting up with joy, which quickly turned to concern when she saw the suitcase and my tear-streaked face. Emma, what happened? Why are you here with your suitcase? She asked, her voice filled with worry. I tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. The dam of emotions I had been holding back broke, and I collapsed into her arms, sobbing uncontrollably. She led me inside, her presence a soothing balm to my shattered soul. It wasn't until much later, when my sobs had subsided into sniffles, that I managed to recount the day's events. I told her about Isabella, about Richard's betrayal, and the painful realization that my marriage was a lie. My mother listened in silence, her eyes reflecting the storm of emotions I felt. Anger, sorrow, disbelief, they all flickered across her face as she processed what I had said. When did it start, Emma? Did you have any suspicions? She finally asked. I shook my head, feeling a fresh wave of pain. I don't know, Mom. I thought we were happy. I was so blind. She took my hand, squeezing it gently. You're not blind, Emma. You trusted the man you loved. There's no shame in that. Her words were a small comfort, but they couldn't quell the storm raging inside me. I felt betrayed, humiliated, and above all furious. The image of Richard and Isabella laughing and planning their future in the house that was supposed to be ours filled me with a burning desire for revenge. What are you going to do, Emma? Are you going to let them get away with this? My mother asked, her voice firm. I looked up, meeting her eyes. In them, I saw a reflection of the determination growing within me. No, Mom. I won't let them get away with this. Richard and his lover will pay for what they've done. The following weeks were a whirlwind of legal consultations and late-night strategy sessions with my mother. We pored over property laws and divorce statutes, seeking loopholes and strategies to turn the tables on Richard. My mother, once a paralegal, became my ally in this battle of wits and law. I returned to the house unannounced, my resolve as solid as the walls around me. Richard and Isabella were in the living room, their laughter echoing through the hallway. They froze as I stepped in, their expressions a mix of surprise and irritation. Emma, what are you doing here? Richard asked, his tone dismissive. I came to talk about the house and our divorce, I said firmly, my eyes never leaving his. Isabella scoffed. Still hung up on that, are you? Move on, Emma. Ignoring her, I focused on Richard. This house is in my name. Legally, you have no claim to it. Richard's face hardened. We built this house together, Emma. I have every right to it. But legally, you don't, I countered, feeling a surge of confidence. And as for the divorce, I'll make sure it reflects your infidelity. Isabella laughed, a harsh sound that grated on my nerves. You think you can intimidate us with legal threats? Grow up, Emma. Richard stood up, his posture tense. You're out of your depth here. Just sign the divorce papers and leave us be. I smiled, a cold, calculated expression. I'm not here to make your life easier, Richard. I'm here to claim what's rightfully mine, and if you think I'll walk away quietly, you're sorely mistaken. The look of shock on Richard's face was satisfying, but it was just the beginning. I knew this was a long battle ahead, and I was ready for it. As I turned to leave, I looked back at them, their faces a picture of disbelief and annoyance. This is my house, and I will fight for it. And Richard, you'll regret the day you decided to betray me, I said, my voice steady and strong. As I walked out of the house, I felt a sense of power I had never experienced before. I was no longer the victim in this story. I was the architect of their downfall, and I would make sure Richard and Isabella paid dearly for their betrayal. Armed with legal advice and a newfound determination, I began to dismantle Richard's life piece by piece. My first move was to freeze our joint accounts, cutting off the financial lifeline he had been so comfortably relying on. I watched, almost detached, as Richard's facade of control began to crumble. A few days later, I received a call from him, his voice a mix of anger and desperation. Emma, what the hell do you think you're doing? You've frozen our accounts. That's right, Richard. You seem to forget that half of that money is mine, I replied, my voice calm and steady. You can't just cut me off like this. We need to discuss this, he demanded. Discuss? Like how you discussed your affair with me. I don't think so, I retorted. Richard's voice grew louder, more frantic. You're ruining everything. This is petty and childish. I could almost see him pacing, his world spinning out of control. Petty? Childish? No, Richard. This is me taking control. You made your choices, and now you'll live with the consequences. I hung up, feeling a rush of adrenaline. For years I had played the part of the supportive, unsuspecting wife. But those days were over. Next, I turned my attention to the house. I consulted with a lawyer and initiated proceedings to evict Richard and Isabella. The legal documents were delivered to them, and I savored the sweet taste of vengeance. Richard called again, this time his voice laced with a hint of fear. You're evicting us? You can't be serious, Emma. Oh, but I am. This house is in my name, and I don't recall inviting you and your girlfriend to stay, I said. You can't just throw us out on the street, he protested. Watch me, I replied coldly. The days that followed were a testament to my resolve. Richard tried to negotiate, to bargain, to plead, but I was unmoved. My heart had turned to stone against the man who had betrayed me so callously. The day of the eviction arrived, and I stood outside the house as Richard and Isabella left, their belongings in tow. Isabella shot me a venomous look, but I met it with a triumphant smile. Enjoy your new life, Richard. You've earned it, I said, my words dripping with sarcasm. As they drove away, I stepped into the house, now empty of their presence. It was a hollow victory, but a victory nonetheless. I had taken back control of my life, and it was just the beginning. Richard and Isabella had underestimated me, and they were now paying the price. With Richard and Isabella out of the house, I focused on the next phase of my plan. I started by changing the locks and installing a new security system, erasing every trace of Richard from what was once our shared space. The house, which had been a symbol of our life together, was now solely under my control. My lawyer and I then began the process of negotiating the divorce settlement. I insisted on a meeting with Richard, wanting to see the impact of my actions face to face. The day of the meeting, I arrived early, composed and ready. Richard walked in, a shadow of his former confident self. His eyes met mine, and for a moment I saw a flicker of the man I had once loved, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by bitterness and resentment. Emma, let's be reasonable about this, he started, his voice strained. Reasonable? Like how you were reasonable when you brought your lover into our home. I countered sharply. He shifted uncomfortably. That was a mistake, I know, but we can still settle this amicably. I leaned forward, my gaze unwavering. Amicable is off the table, Richard. You lost that option when you decided to betray me. The negotiations were tense, with Richard trying to salvage whatever he could. But I was unyielding. In the end, we reached a settlement heavily in my favor. Richard would have to liquidate most of his assets to meet the terms. As he signed the papers, his hand trembling slightly, I felt a sense of satisfaction. This was more than just a legal victory. It was a moral one. After the meeting, I received a call from Isabella. Her voice was high-pitched and frantic. "Emma, you can't do this to us. You're destroying our lives," she cried. I replied coldly, "Your comfort was never my concern, Isabella. You and Richard made your bed. Now you get to lie in it." "But we have nothing now. How could you be so heartless?" she wailed. "Heartless? You expect sympathy from me? I'm giving you exactly what you deserve," I said, hanging up the phone. In the weeks that followed, I watched as Richard's life unraveled. His financial woes, compounded by the divorce settlement, left him struggling to keep afloat. Isabella, once so confident and carefree, became a frequent figure in heated arguments outside my lawyer's office. I had taken back control, not just of my home, but of my life. Richard and Isabella were now mere players in a game they had no hope of winning. The tides had turned, and I was the one setting the course. The months following the divorce were a testament to the change in our fortunes. I rebuilt my life, slowly filling the empty spaces in the house with new memories, while Richard's world seemed to crumble around him. One day, I received an unexpected visit from Richard. He looked disheveled, a far cry from the confident man he once was. His eyes had a desperate look as he stood on my doorstep. "Emma, please, we need to talk," he pleaded. I crossed my arms, blocking the doorway. "What is there to talk about, Richard?" "It's about the settlement. I can't afford it. I'm drowning in debt," he said, his voice breaking. I felt a pang of something that might have been pity, but it was quickly overshadowed by the memory of his betrayal. "That's not my problem, Richard. You should have thought about that before." He took a step closer, desperation etching his features. "I was wrong, Emma. I know that now. But this is too much. I can't survive like this." I looked at him, the man who had once meant the world to me, now reduced to a shell of his former self. "Survive? Like I had to when you shattered my world? You're just tasting a bit of your own medicine, Richard." Richard's face twisted in a mix of anger and sorrow. "Is this what you wanted, Emma? To see me destroyed?" "This is what justice looks like, Richard. You made your choices, and now you're living with the consequences," I replied. He stared at me, the realization dawning on him that there was no sympathy to be found here. With a defeated look, he turned and walked away, his shoulders slumped. As I closed the door, I realized that the satisfaction I had expected to feel was muted. Watching Richard's downfall was a hollow victory. It didn't bring back the years of trust and love that had been lost, nor did it erase the pain of betrayal, but it was a necessary closure. I had stood up for myself, fought back against injustice, and reclaimed my life. It was time to move on, to leave the past and its pain behind. In the quiet of my home, I knew that the battle was over. I had won, not just against Richard, but against the helplessness that had once threatened to engulf me. It was a victory, not of revenge, but of resilience and renewal. The final act of my retribution came unexpectedly. Richard, now a shadow of his former self, reached out to me again, but this time it was different. He needed my help. We met at a coffee shop, a neutral ground far from the memories of our shared past. Richard was late, and when he arrived, he looked more haggard than ever. "Emma, I'm in trouble," he said without preamble, his voice laden with a fatigue I hadn't heard before. I raised an eyebrow, sipping my coffee. "Trouble? What kind of trouble?" It's Isabella. She's pregnant," he confessed, avoiding my gaze. The news didn't surprise me as much as his reaction to it. "And how is that my problem, Richard?" He swallowed hard, the lines on his face deepening. "It's not just that she's pregnant. She's demanding money, a lot of it. She says if I don't pay, she'll make sure I never see the child." I listened, my expression unreadable. "So the woman you left me for is now blackmailing you?" How poetic. Richard's eyes met mine, a flicker of the man he used to be shining through his desperation. "I don't know what to do, Emma. I've lost everything. I can't afford to lose my child, too." There was a time when his plea would have tugged at my heartstrings, but that time was long gone. "You expect sympathy from me, after everything you've done?" "No, not sympathy. Help. I need your help, Emma," he said, the words seeming to cost him his last shred of pride. I considered his request, the irony of the situation not lost on me. Richard, once so sure of himself and his decisions, was now at my mercy. But I wasn't the same woman he had left. His problems were no longer mine to bear. "I can't help you, Richard. This is the life you chose. You have to deal with the consequences, just like I did," I said, my voice firm. Richard looked defeated, his shoulders slumping as he realized that there was no help to be found here. He nodded slowly, a resigned acceptance in his eyes. As he left, I watched him go, feeling a sense of finality wash over me. This was the end of our story, a story that had started with love and ended with betrayal and retribution. I sat there for a long time, lost in thought. My journey had been painful, filled with betrayal and heartache, but it had also been empowering. I had found strength I never knew I had, and I had come out on the other side, stronger and more resilient. Richard's downfall was a stark reminder of the consequences of betrayal, but it was also a reminder that I was no longer defined by his actions. I was my own person, free from the shadows of the past. As I left the coffee shop, I felt a sense of closure. The chapter of my life that was Richard was finally closed, and a new chapter was waiting to be written. A chapter filled with hope, strength, and the promise of a new beginning. As months turned into seasons, I found myself embarking on a journey of self-discovery and rebuilding. The house, once a symbol of shared dreams with Richard, gradually transformed into a sanctuary of my personal triumph and newfound independence. One evening, as I sat in the living room surrounded by the new decor that reflected my tastes, the doorbell rang. Hesitantly, I opened the door to find Isabella standing there. Her appearance drastically changed. Gone was the confident, carefree woman. In her place stood someone who looked defeated and weary. "Emma, I need to talk to you," she said, her voice lacking its former haughtiness. I was taken aback but composed myself quickly. "What do you want, Isabella?" She took a deep breath, her eyes not meeting mine. "I made a mistake, a big mistake. Richard's left me, and I'm alone with a baby on the way. I have nowhere to go." The irony of her standing on my doorstep, seeking help, was not lost on me. "And you think I'm the person to help you? After everything?" Isabella's eyes filled with tears. "I know I have no right to ask you for anything, but I'm desperate. I've lost everything." I looked at her, seeing in her the reflection of the pain and betrayal I had once felt. But where Richard had ignited a fire of retribution in me, Isabella's plight stirred a different emotion. "Isabella, the choices we make define us. You made your choice when you got involved with a married man," I said, my voice steady. She nodded, a tear rolling down her cheek. "I know, and I'm paying for that choice now. I didn't know where else to go." I sighed, feeling a sense of closure and compassion that surprised me. "I can't change the past, Isabella, nor can I forget it, but I believe in second chances. I'll help you, but not because of Richard or our past. I'm doing this for your child, who shouldn't suffer for our mistakes." Isabella looked up, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "Thank you, Emma. I don't know how to repay you." I shook my head. "You don't owe me anything. Consider this a new start for both of us." As she left, I closed the door and leaned against it, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. Helping Isabella was the final step in letting go of the bitterness and pain. It was a gesture not of forgiveness but of release. Standing in my home, I realized that I had not only survived the storm but emerged stronger. I had faced betrayal, fought for justice, and found a way to move forward with grace and dignity. I walked to the window, looking out at the night sky. The stars seemed to shine a little brighter, and I felt a sense of peace. The chapter of revenge had closed, and a new chapter of hope and resilience had begun. In that moment, I knew that no matter what the future held, I was ready for it. I had reclaimed my life, my home, and my identity. And with that knowledge, I stepped into the future, unburdened and free.